The storm that swept through Dodge City that October evening carried more than just rain. It brought secrets that would shake the very foundations of the town. Lightning split the darkened sky as Jack Hargrove sat in his usual corner of Murphy's saloon, nursing a glass of whiskey that had grown warm in his weathered hands. At 43, Jack had earned his reputation as the loner through years of keeping to himself, speaking only when necessary, and trusting no one. "Hi, how are you? Sorry to interrupt your story, but what I'm going to ask you is really quick, and it will really help the channel to grow and create new stories. Just click below the video image to subscribe. You'll be doing an act of kindness and encouragement to those who are just starting out. Thank you very much, and continue with your story." The saloon was nearly empty, save for old Murphy behind the bar and a couple of drifters playing cards near the window. The rhythmic drumming of rain against the roof created a hypnotic melody that seemed to wash away the day's troubles. Jack preferred nights like these. Quiet, predictable, safe. That's when he heard it. A soft thud against the back door, followed by frantic scratching. Jack's hand instinctively moved to the Colt .45 at his hip, his senses sharpening like a wolf catching an unfamiliar scent. Years of survival had taught him that unexpected sounds in the night usually meant trouble. "Murphy," Jack called softly, his voice cutting through the ambient noise. "You expecting anyone?" The elderly bartender looked up from the glass he was cleaning, his bushy eyebrows furrowed. "Not in this weather, Jack. Probably just the wind knocking something loose." But Jack knew better. The scratching came again, more desperate this time, accompanied by what sounded like muffled sobbing. Against his better judgment, and every instinct that had kept him alive this long, Jack rose from his chair and moved toward the back door. The wooden door was old and warped, its hinges protesting with a rusty groan as Jack pulled it open. What he saw in the narrow alley behind the saloon made his breath catch in his throat. A boy, no more than 12 years old, crouched against the brick wall like a cornered animal. His clothes were torn and soaked through, his dark hair plastered to his skull by the relentless rain. Mud streaked his pale face, but it couldn't hide the terror in his wide green eyes that reminded Jack of someone he'd tried hard to forget. "Please," the boy whispered, his voice barely audible above the storm. "They're coming. They're going to find me." Jack stood frozen in the doorway, his mind racing. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to close the door, to walk away, to maintain the careful distance he'd built between himself and the world. Getting involved meant complications, and complications meant pain, a lesson he'd learned the hard way 5 years ago when his own family had paid the price for his choices. But those eyes, those desperate, pleading eyes that held the same innocence his daughter Emma had possessed before the world took her away. "Come in," Jack heard himself say, his voice rough with emotion he thought he'd buried. "Before it's too late." The boy stared at him, confusion mixing with the fear in his expression. For a moment neither moved, as if time itself had paused to witness this crossroads moment that would change both their lives forever. I don't understand," the boy stammered. "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." Jack stepped aside, gesturing for the boy to enter. "Sometimes that's exactly why we help. What's your name, son?" "Elias," the boy whispered, as he stumbled past Jack into the warm, dry interior of the saloon. Elias Reed. The name hit Jack like a physical blow. Reed. He'd heard that name whispered in dark corners of the town, always accompanied by hushed tones and fearful glances. The Reed family had been prominent in Dodge City until they'd mysteriously disappeared 6 months ago, leaving behind only questions and a house that now stood empty on the hill overlooking the town. "Elias Reed," Jack repeated slowly, closing the door behind them. "I thought you were dead," Elias finished, his young voice carrying a bitterness that no child should possess. "That's what they want everyone to think. That's what they told everyone when they took my mother." Murphy looked up from behind the bar, his eyes widening as he recognized the boy. "Sweet Mary and Joseph," he breathed. "It's the Reed boy. But how—" "Murphy," Jack interrupted sharply. "Lock the front door, now!" The urgency in Jack's voice spurred the old bartender into action. As Murphy hurried to secure the entrance, Jack guided Elias to his table in the corner, away from the windows. The boy was shivering. Whether from cold or fear, Jack couldn't tell. "Here," Jack said, shrugging off his worn leather coat and draping it around Elias's thin shoulders. "Tell me what happened. Who's after you?" Elias pulled the coat tighter around himself, his eyes darting nervously toward the windows. "Sheriff Doyle," he whispered, "and the Blackwood family. They think I have something that belongs to them, but I don't understand what they want." Jack's blood ran cold at the mention of the Blackwoods. The wealthiest family in Dodge City, they owned half the businesses in town and had their fingers in every pie that mattered. If they were involved, this was bigger than just a missing boy. "What do you have, Elias? What are they looking for?" The boy reached into his torn shirt and pulled out a small, wrapped object. With trembling fingers, he unwrapped it to reveal a photograph, old and slightly damaged, but clear enough to make out the faces of 3 people. A woman who bore a strong resemblance to Elias, a man in an expensive suit, and Sheriff Doyle himself. "My mother gave this to me before they took her," Elias said, his voice breaking. "She said it was the only thing that could prove the truth about what really happened to my father." Jack studied the photograph, his mind working to piece together the implications. "Your father didn't die in that mining accident, did he?" Elias shook his head, tears mixing with the rainwater still dripping from his hair. "Mother said he found out about something the Blackwoods were doing, something that could destroy them. When he tried to expose it, they killed him and made it look like an accident." The sound of horses' hooves splashing through the muddy street outside made them both freeze. Jack moved to the window and peered through a gap in the curtains. 3 riders were making their way down the main street, their faces hidden beneath wide-brimmed hats. But Jack recognized the lead horse, a distinctive black stallion that belonged to Sheriff Doyle. "They're here," Jack whispered, his hand moving to his gun. "Murphy, is there another way out of here?" "The cellar," Murphy replied, his voice tight with fear. "There's a tunnel that leads to the old church. Built it during the Indian raids years back." Jack turned to Elias, seeing his own reflection in the boy's terrified eyes. The same fear, the same desperation he'd felt when he'd lost everything that mattered to him. But this time, he had a chance to make a difference. This time, he wouldn't run. "Listen to me, Elias," Jack said, gripping the boy's shoulders gently but firmly. "I'm going to get you out of here, but I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" Elias nodded, clutching the photograph against his chest like a lifeline. "Good. Now, whatever happens next, stay close to me and do exactly as I say. We're going to find out the truth about what happened to your parents, and we're going to make sure the people responsible pay for what they've done." As the sound of boots approached the saloon's front door, Jack made a silent promise to the frightened boy beside him, and to the memory of his own lost daughter. This time, he wouldn't let the innocent suffer. This time, he would fight. The storm outside was just beginning, but the real tempest was about to be unleashed within the walls of Murphy's saloon. The cellar beneath Murphy's saloon smelled of damp earth and old whiskey barrels, but to Jack Hargrove, it smelled like salvation. He guided Elias through the narrow space, their footsteps muffled by years of accumulated dust and debris. Above them, the sound of heavy boots echoed across the saloon floor, accompanied by Sheriff Doyle's gruff voice demanding answers from Murphy. "Where is he, old man?" Doyle's voice carried through the floorboards like thunder. "We know the boy came this way. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Jack pressed a finger to his lips, signaling Elias to remain silent. The boy's eyes were wide with terror, but he nodded his understanding. In the dim light filtering through the cracks above, Jack could see that Elias still clutched the photograph that had started this nightmare. Murphy's voice drifted down from above, steady despite the circumstances. "I told you, Sheriff. I haven't seen hide nor hair of any boy. Been a quiet night, what with the storm and all. Search every corner," Doyle commanded. "Check the back rooms, the storage areas, everywhere. That boy has something that doesn't belong to him, and Mr. Blackwood wants it back." Jack led Elias deeper into the cellar, toward the tunnel Murphy had mentioned. The passage was narrow and low, forcing them to crouch as they made their way through the darkness. Jack had traveled many dangerous paths in his 43 years, but none had felt as crucial as this one. "Mr. Hargrove," Elias whispered, his voice barely audible, "why are you helping me? Everyone else in town is too scared of the Blackwoods to stand up to them." Jack paused in the tunnel, considering his answer. The truth was complicated, wrapped up in guilt, loss, and a desperate need for redemption that he'd carried for 5 years. But this wasn't the time for his own story. "Because sometimes," Jack replied quietly, "a man gets a chance to do the right thing, and sometimes that's all that matters." They emerged from the tunnel into the basement of the old Methodist church on the edge of town. The building had been abandoned for 2 years after the congregation moved to a newer structure closer to the center of Dodge City. It was the perfect hiding place, forgotten by most, avoided by the superstitious. Jack helped Elias up through the cellar door into the main sanctuary. Moonlight filtered through the stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns across the dusty pews. The storm had begun to subside, but the danger was far from over. "We can't stay here long," Jack said, moving to one of the windows to survey their surroundings. "Doyle's not stupid. He'll figure out where we went eventually." Elias sank into one of the front pews, exhaustion finally overtaking him. "I don't understand why they want this photograph so badly," he said, looking down at the image in his hands. "It's just a picture of my mother with some men." Jack sat beside him, studying the photograph more carefully. "Tell me about your father, Elias. What kind of work did he do?" "He was a surveyor," Elias replied. "He mapped out land for the railroad companies and mining operations. He was always traveling, always documenting things." The boy's voice grew softer. "Mother said he was the most honest man she'd ever known. Said he couldn't tell a lie if his life depended on it." Jack's mind began to piece together the puzzle. "And this photograph, when was it taken?" "About a year ago, I think. Mother said it was taken at some kind of business meeting. She was there because Father wanted her to witness something important." The sound of horses approaching made Jack tense. Through the window, he could see torches moving through the streets, a search party, methodically checking every building in town. They had perhaps 10 minutes before the searchers reached the church. "Elias," Jack said urgently, "I need you to think carefully. Did your father ever mention anything about the Blackwood mining operations? Anything unusual or suspicious?" The boy's brow furrowed in concentration. "He said something to Mother once about numbers not adding up, about claims being filed for land that was supposed to be protected, but I didn't understand what he meant." Jack felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. Land fraud was a serious crime in the territories, especially when it involved government-protected areas. If Thomas Blackwood was illegally claiming federal land for mining operations, it would explain the desperate lengths he'd go to keep it secret. "Your father discovered something that could destroy the Blackwood Empire," Jack said. "And that photograph is proof." "But how? It's just a picture of people talking." Jack looked more closely at the image, noting details he'd missed before. In the background, barely visible, was a surveyor's map spread across a table. And on that map, he could make out markings that looked suspiciously like federal boundary lines. "It's not just people talking, son. It's evidence of a conspiracy. Your mother was smart to make sure you got this photograph. She knew it was the only thing that could bring justice for your father's death." The torches were getting closer now. Jack could hear voices calling out, searching every shadow and doorway. They needed to move, but where could they go? The entire town was under Doyle's control, and the Blackwoods had eyes and ears everywhere. "There's an old line shack about 5 miles north of here," Jack said, making a decision. "It's been abandoned for years, but it's shelter. We can hide there until I figure out our next move." "What about the photograph? Shouldn't we take it to the federal marshal in Wichita?" Jack shook his head. "We'd never make it that far. Doyle has men watching all the roads out of town. No, we need to be smarter than that. We need to make them come to us." As they prepared to leave the church, Elias grabbed Jack's arm. "Mr. Hargrove, there's something else. Something I haven't told you." Jack turned, seeing a new kind of fear in the boy's eyes. "My mother, she's not dead. At least, I don't think she is." Before they took her, she told me she was going to hide somewhere safe until help came. She said if anything happened to her, I should find the place where Father proposed to her and look for a sign." Jack felt his heart skip a beat. "Do you know where that place is?" "The old oak tree by Miller's Creek. There's a heart carved in the bark with their initials inside it." The sound of the church door rattling made them both freeze. Someone was testing the lock, trying to get inside. Jack drew his gun, motioning for Elias to stay behind him. "Sheriff's Department," a voice called out. "Open up!" Jack recognized the voice. Deputy Marcus Webb, one of Doyle's most loyal men. Webb was young and eager to please, which made him dangerous in a different way than his corrupt boss. "The back window," Jack whispered to Elias. "Can you climb out?" The boy nodded, moving quietly toward the rear of the church. Jack followed, keeping his gun trained on the front door. The lock wouldn't hold much longer under Webb's persistent efforts. They slipped out through the back window just as the front door burst open. Jack could hear Webb and another deputy spreading out through the sanctuary, their boots echoing in the empty space. "Check every pew," Webb ordered. "They were here recently. I can smell the fear." Jack and Elias crept through the shadows behind the church, making their way toward the tree line that bordered the north side of town. The storm clouds were breaking up, allowing patches of moonlight to illuminate their path, a blessing and a curse. As they reached the safety of the trees, Jack turned back to look at Dodge City spread out below them. Somewhere in that collection of buildings and flickering lights, a woman was being held prisoner. Somewhere in those streets, corrupt men were plotting to cover up murder and theft, and somewhere in the darkness, the truth was waiting to be uncovered. "We're going to find your mother, Elias," Jack promised, his voice carrying the weight of an oath. "And we're going to make sure the people who destroyed your family pay for what they've done." The boy looked up at him with eyes that held a glimmer of hope for the first time since Jack had found him in that alley. "How can you be so sure?" Jack thought of his own daughter, of the promises he'd failed to keep, of the second chance he'd been given to make things right. "Because sometimes," he said, "the only way to heal old wounds is to prevent new ones." As they disappeared into the forest, the hunt for the truth was just beginning. Dawn broke gray and cold over the Kansas prairie as Jack Hargrove and Elias Reed made their way through the tall grass toward Miller's Creek. They had spent the night in the abandoned line shack, taking turns keeping watch while the other slept fitfully on the hard wooden floor. Jack's bones ached from the uncomfortable rest, but his mind was sharp with purpose. The old oak tree stood like a sentinel beside the creek, its massive trunk scarred by decades of wind and weather. As they approached, Jack could see the heart carved into the bark, just as Elias had described. The initials TR plus MS were still clearly visible, though weathered by time. "Thomas Reed and Mary Sullivan," Elias said softly, running his fingers over the carved letters. "Mother told me Father carved this the night he asked her to marry him. She said it was the most romantic thing anyone had ever done for her." Jack studied the area around the tree, looking for any sign of recent disturbance. The ground was soft from the previous night's rain, making it easy to spot tracks. He found what he was looking for about 10 feet from the base of the oak, a small area where the earth had been recently disturbed and then carefully covered with leaves and debris. "Here," Jack said, kneeling beside the spot. "Help me clear this away." They worked together, brushing aside the natural camouflage to reveal a small wooden box buried just beneath the surface. Jack lifted it carefully, noting its weight and the way it had been wrapped in oiled cloth to protect it from moisture. Elias's hands trembled as he opened the box. Inside, they found a collection of documents, more photographs, and a letter written in a woman's careful handwriting. The letter was addressed simply, "For my beloved Elias." "Read it," Jack encouraged gently. Elias unfolded the letter, his voice shaking as he began to read aloud. "My dearest son, if you are reading this, then the worst has happened, and I am no longer able to protect you myself. Your father was a good man who died trying to expose a terrible injustice. The documents in this box contain proof of what the Blackwood family has been doing, stealing federal land, bribing officials, and murdering anyone who threatens to expose them. I am hiding in the old Jameson mine, 3 miles east of town. It was abandoned years ago, but there are still chambers deep enough to provide shelter. I pray that help will come soon. But if it doesn't, know that everything your father and I did was to ensure you would have a future, free from the corruption that plagues this town. Trust no one in Dodge City except Murphy at the saloon. He was your father's friend and can be counted on. Find someone brave enough to take this evidence to the federal authorities. Make them pay for what they've done to our family. All my love, Mother. Jack felt a surge of hope mixed with urgency. Mary Reed was alive. But for how long? The Jameson mine was dangerous territory. Unstable tunnels and the constant risk of cave-ins made it a place most people avoided. But it was also the perfect hiding place for someone desperate enough to risk everything. We have to go to her, Elias said, starting to rise from beside the creek. Jack caught his arm gently. We will, son. But first, we need to look at what else your mother left us. The documents in the box painted a picture of corruption that went deeper than Jack had imagined. Survey maps showed federal land being illegally claimed by Blackwood Mining Company. Correspondence between Thomas Blackwood and various officials revealed a network of bribery and intimidation. Most damning of all were the financial records showing payments to Sheriff Doyle for special services. Your father was thorough, Jack said, studying a particularly detailed survey map. This evidence could bring down half the territorial government. But why did they kill him? Why not just pay him off like the others? Jack looked at the earnest face of the 12-year-old boy and chose his words carefully. Because your father was an honest man, Elias. And honest men can't be bought. They can only be silenced. The sound of approaching horses made them both freeze. Jack quickly gathered the documents and photographs, stuffing them back into the box. Through the trees, he could see riders approaching, at least 4 men, moving with the purposeful gait of a search party. The creek, Jack whispered urgently. We can follow it downstream and use the banks for cover. They slipped down into the shallow water, the cold shocking their systems but providing the concealment they needed. Jack led the way, moving carefully to avoid splashing while keeping the precious box of evidence above water. Behind them, they could hear the riders reaching the oak tree. Voices carried across the morning air, Sheriff Doyle's distinctive growl among them. Fresh tracks, Doyle was saying. They were here recently. Spread out and search the area. They can't have gone far. Jack and Elias continued downstream, using the natural curves of the creek to stay out of sight. The water was deeper here, reaching almost to Elias's chest, but the boy pushed forward without complaint. Jack found himself admiring the kid's courage. Most adults would have broken under this kind of pressure. After what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, they reached a point where the creek passed under a small wooden bridge. Jack helped Elias climb up onto the bank, both of them soaked and shivering, but grateful to be on dry land again. The mine is east of here, Jack said, consulting his mental map of the area. But we need to be careful. If Doyle figures out where your mother is hiding, he'll kill her, Elias finished, his young voice carrying a weight of understanding that no child should possess. Jack nodded grimly. Which is why we need to get to her first. But we also need a plan for what comes after. This evidence is valuable, but it's no good to us if we're all dead. They made their way across the prairie, staying low and using whatever cover they could find. The morning sun was climbing higher, making concealment more difficult but also warming their soaked clothes. Jack kept one eye on their surroundings and another on Elias, watching for signs that the boy was reaching his limits. Mr. Hargrove, Elias said as they paused behind a small rise, can I ask you something? Of course. You said earlier that sometimes a man gets a chance to do the right thing. But there's more to it than that, isn't there? You're not just helping me because it's right. You're helping me because of something that happened to you. Jack was quiet for a long moment, surprised by the boy's perceptiveness. You're pretty smart for a 12-year-old. My father always said that understanding people was just as important as understanding maps. So what happened to you? Jack looked out across the prairie, seeing not the Kansas grassland, but a small farm in Colorado, a woman's laugh, a little girl's smile. I had a family once. A wife named Sarah and a daughter named Emma. Emma was about your age when I lost them. How? Men like the Blackwoods. Different names, different faces, but the same kind of corruption. I was a sheriff then, trying to clean up a town that didn't want to be cleaned up. I thought I could protect them, but I was wrong. The people I was fighting against decided to send me a message. Elias was quiet, sensing the pain in Jack's voice. I've spent the last 5 years running from that failure, Jack continued, telling myself that it was better to stay uninvolved, to not care about anyone or anything. But when I saw you in that alley, scared and alone, I saw Emma, and I realized that running away doesn't heal anything. It just lets the wound fester. Is that why they call you the loner? Jack managed a small smile. I earned that name by choice, but maybe it's time to earn a new one. They crested the rise and saw their destination in the distance, the entrance to the Jameson mine, partially hidden by scrub brush and fallen timber. Smoke was rising from somewhere within the mine complex, a thin wisp that could easily be mistaken for morning mist. She's there, Elias breathed, hope and fear warring in his voice. Jack studied the area carefully, looking for signs of danger. The mine appeared deserted, but appearances could be deceiving. If Doyle had already found Mary Reed, "We go in, careful and quiet," Jack said. "Stay behind me, and if I tell you to run, you run. Understand?" Elias nodded, clutching the box of evidence against his chest like a shield. As they made their way down toward the mine entrance, Jack found himself thinking about second chances and the strange ways that fate sometimes offered redemption. He couldn't save Sarah and Emma, but maybe, just maybe, he could save this boy and his mother. The entrance to the mine yawned before them like a mouth leading into the earth's dark secrets. Somewhere in those tunnels, a woman waited for rescue. Somewhere behind them, corrupt men searched for the evidence that could destroy them. And somewhere in the balance between hope and despair, Jack Hargrove prepared to face the demons that had haunted him for 5 long years. The Jameson mine entrance loomed before them like a gateway to another world. Jack Hargrove paused at the threshold, his hand resting on his Colt .45 as he listened for any sounds from within the dark tunnels. Beside him, Elias Reed clutched the box of evidence that could bring justice for his father's murder, his young face set with determination that reminded Jack of his own daughter's stubborn courage. "Mother?" Elias called softly into the darkness. "Mother, it's me. It's Elias." A faint sound echoed from deep within the mine, a voice, weak but unmistakably alive. Jack felt a surge of relief mixed with urgency. Mary Reed was here, but for how long would she remain safe? They made their way into the tunnel, using the small oil lamp Jack had taken from the line shack to light their path. The air was stale and heavy with the scent of old timber and damp earth. Support beams creaked ominously overhead, reminders of why this mine had been abandoned in the first place. "Elias?" The voice was stronger now, coming from a side tunnel about 50 yards into the mine. "Oh, my dear boy, is it really you?" They found Mary Reed in a small chamber that had once been used for storing equipment. She was thin and pale from her ordeal, but her eyes blazed with the same fierce intelligence that Jack had seen in her son. When she saw Elias, she pulled him into her arms with a sob of relief. "I thought they had caught you," she whispered, holding him tight. "I've been so afraid." "I'm all right, Mother," Elias said, his voice muffled against her shoulder. "And I brought help. This is Mr. Hargrove. He saved me from Sheriff Doyle." Mary looked up at Jack, her gaze assessing and grateful. "Mr. Hargrove, I've heard of you, the man they call the loner. Why would you risk yourself for strangers?" Jack met her eyes steadily. "Because some things are worth the risk, ma'am. And because your boy reminds me of someone I failed to protect once. I won't make that mistake again." Mary's expression softened with understanding. "You've lost someone. A daughter. About Elias's age." Jack's voice was quiet but steady. "But right now, what matters is getting you and your son to safety, and making sure the people who killed your husband face justice." Elias opened the box of evidence, showing his mother the documents they had retrieved from beneath the oak tree. "We found everything you hid, Mother. all of Father's proof about what the Blackwoods have been doing. Mary's eyes filled with tears as she looked through the papers. Your father died for this evidence. He believed that the truth would eventually prevail, even if it cost him everything. It will prevail, Jack said firmly. But first, we need to get out of here. Doyle and his men are searching the area, and it's only a matter of time before they— The sound of horses approaching cut him off. Through the mine entrance, they could see torches moving in the pre-dawn darkness. Sheriff Doyle's voice carried clearly in the still air. Check every tunnel, every chamber. They're in here somewhere, and I want them found. Jack quickly extinguished their lamp, plunging them into darkness. Is there another way out of here? He whispered to Mary. There's an old ventilation shaft about 100 yards deeper into the mine, she replied. It comes out near the creek, but the tunnel is partially collapsed. It would be dangerous. More dangerous than staying here? The sound of boots entering the mine made the decision for them. Jack helped Mary to her feet, noting how weak she was from days of hiding with little food or water. This was going to be more challenging than he'd hoped. They made their way deeper into the mine, feeling along the walls in the darkness. Behind them, they could hear Doyle's men spreading out, their voices echoing off the tunnel walls. Jack counted at least 4 different voices, which meant they were outnumbered, but not necessarily outgunned. Here, Mary whispered, stopping beside what felt like a narrow opening in the tunnel wall. This leads to the ventilation shaft. Jack peered into the opening, feeling cool air flowing through it. The passage was tight, barely wide enough for an adult to squeeze through, but it was their only option. Elias goes first, Jack decided. Then your mother, then me. If we get separated, head for Murphy's saloon. He'll help you get word to the federal marshal in Wichita. What about you? Elias asked, fear creeping into his voice. I'll be right behind you, son. I promise. They began the treacherous journey through the narrow passage. The walls pressed in on all sides, and more than once they had to navigate around fallen rocks and debris. Jack could hear Elias encouraging his mother ahead of him, the boy's voice steady despite their desperate circumstances. Behind them, the sounds of the search were getting closer. Jack heard Doyle's voice, angry and frustrated. They're not in the main tunnels. Check the side passages, the storage chambers, everywhere. The passage opened into a larger chamber, and Jack could see faint light filtering down from above, the ventilation shaft. But his heart sank as he realized the extent of the damage. The shaft was partially blocked by fallen timber and rocks, leaving an opening barely large enough for a child to squeeze through. I can make it, Elias said, reading Jack's expression. I can climb up and then help pull Mother through. It's too dangerous, Mary protested. If the shaft collapses, if we stay here, we're dead for certain, Jack pointed out. At least this way, we have a chance. The sound of voices in the passage behind them made the decision urgent. Doyle's men had found their trail. Elias began climbing, using the fallen timber as makeshift ladder rungs. Jack watched with his heart in his throat as the boy squeezed through gaps that seemed impossibly narrow. After what felt like an eternity, they heard his voice from above. I made it! I'm at the top! Mary went next, with Jack boosting her up and Elias pulling from above. She was smaller than Jack and made it through the worst of the blockage, though not without scraping her arms and legs on the rough timber. Jack was preparing to follow when he heard footsteps in the chamber behind him. A lantern light flickered against the walls, and he knew they were out of time. Go! He called up to Mary and Elias. Get to Murphy's! Get that evidence to the federal marshal! We're not leaving without you! Elias called back. Jack drew his gun and turned to face the passage entrance. You have to. That evidence is the only thing that can bring justice for your father. Sheriff Doyle appeared in the passage entrance, his gun drawn and his face twisted with rage. Behind him, Jack could see Deputy Webb and 2 other men. End of the line, Hargrove, Doyle snarled. Where's the boy and his mother? Gone, Jack replied calmly. Along with all the evidence of your corruption. Doyle's face darkened. You have no idea what you're interfering with. The Blackwoods own this territory. They own me. They own the judges. They own everyone who matters. Maybe, Jack said, but they don't own the federal government, and they don't own the truth. The truth? Doyle laughed harshly. The truth is whatever people with power say it is. And you, Hargrove, have no power at all. You're wrong about that, Jack said. And he meant it. For the first time in 5 years, he felt like he had real power. The power that came from doing the right thing, regardless of the cost. The gunfight was brief but decisive. Jack's years of experience and the advantage of position served him well. When the smoke cleared, Doyle lay wounded but alive, his deputies either dead or fled. Jack quickly disarmed the corrupt sheriff and began climbing toward the ventilation shaft. He found Mary and Elias waiting for him at the top, both of them crying with relief. The sun was rising over the Kansas prairie, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink that seemed to promise new beginnings. "Is it over?" Elias asked. Jack looked back toward Dodge City, where smoke was rising from several buildings. Word of the evidence had spread quickly, and the people of the town were finally standing up to the corruption that had plagued them for so long. "It's over," Jack confirmed. "Your father's death has been avenged, and the truth has finally come to light." 3 months later, Jack Hargrove stood in the same spot beside Miller's Creek, watching as Elias Reed carved a new set of initials into the old oak tree. J.H. for the man who had become like a father to him, and E.R. for the boy who had helped heal an old man's wounded heart. The Blackwood Empire had crumbled under federal investigation. Sheriff Doyle and his accomplices were in prison, and Mary Reed had been reunited with her son, free to build a new life without fear. Jack was no longer known as the Loner. In Dodge City, they called him something else now, the Guardian. And for the first time in 5 years, Jack Hargrove was at peace with the man he saw in the mirror. Some wounds, he had learned, could only be healed by preventing others from suffering the same pain. Some redemption could only be found in the courage to care again, despite the risk. As the sun set over the prairie, Jack smiled and headed home, to the family he had chosen and the life he had finally learned to embrace. The end. Hello, how are you? Did you enjoy the story? Like, share, comment on which city you're watching from, and subscribe to the channel to help us continue adding new amazing videos. Thank you very much, and come back often.